The street boy's eyes locked with the industrialist's, and a faded blue tattoo emerged from beneath his ragged sleeve. A sequence of numbers that shouldn't exist, identical to his deceased son's birthmark. The industrialist collapsed onto the sidewalk, the color draining from his face as he stared at a child who had been buried 12 years ago. Samuel Rothwell, a renowned industrial magnate known across Europe for his steel empire and philanthropic endeavors, had stopped his luxury sedan along a crowded street in central London. It was meant to be a routine outing with his fiancée, Eliza Harrington. The couple had been engaged for 6 months, and their wedding was scheduled for the following spring. Samuel had lost his wife and only child in a yacht accident 12 years prior, and after a decade of solitude and grief, he had finally opened his heart again. The day was ordinary. Cloudy skies, threatening rain, bustling shoppers hurrying between stores, street vendors calling out their wares. Samuel had simply stopped to purchase a newspaper from a corner stand when it happened. A small, rail-thin boy with hollow cheeks approached his window, tapping softly on the glass. The child's clothes hung from his frame, tattered and soiled, his face smudged with dirt. But his eyes, those eyes were unmistakable. Large, unusually pale blue, with a distinctive amber fleck in the left iris. Eliza noticed Samuel's sudden rigidity, the way his breathing became shallow and quick. She touched his arm gently and followed his gaze to the child outside. "Samuel, what's wrong?" she asked, concern etching her delicate features. Samuel couldn't speak. He simply stared, transfixed by the impossible vision before him. The boy continued tapping, his small hand extended in a silent plea for spare change. "He looks like your dead son," Eliza whispered, her voice barely audible. "The resemblance is uncanny." Samuel flung open the car door so forcefully that it nearly struck a passing pedestrian. The driver, alarmed by his employer's sudden movement, half-turned in his seat. "Sir, is everything all right?" But Samuel was already on the sidewalk, approaching the child with trembling steps. The boy, startled by the man's intensity, began to back away. "I'm sorry, mister," he stammered. "I didn't mean no harm." "Your name," Samuel managed to say, his voice cracking. "What's your name, boy?" The child hesitated, glancing around as if searching for escape. "Thomas," he finally answered, "but everyone calls me Tom." Thomas, the same name as Samuel's son. The industrialist reached out, his hand shaking visibly. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the boy's arm. Thomas, confused but seemingly accustomed to strange requests from adults, cautiously extended his right arm. Samuel pushed up the tattered sleeve, and there it was, a sequence of faded blue numbers tattooed into the child's skin. 290645, the exact date of his son's birth, the 29th of June, 1945, rendered in a crude tattoo that appeared decades old. Samuel staggered backward, his knees buckling beneath him. He collapsed onto the sidewalk, gasping for air, as Eliza rushed to his side. "Samuel!" she cried, cradling his head. "Someone call for help!" The crowd that had gathered watched in stunned silence as the distinguished gentleman lay sprawled on the filthy pavement, his eyes never leaving the frightened child. Dr. James Blackwood had been London's most respected forensic pathologist for over 30 years. His silver hair and weathered face spoke of decades spent examining the most puzzling deaths in the city's history. When Samuel Rothwell, a man whose name was synonymous with power and influence, personally requested his expertise on a matter of extreme delicacy and impossibility, Dr. Blackwood couldn't refuse. They met in Samuel's private study, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound books and illuminated by a single fireplace. The industrialist sat rigid in his armchair, his face haggard from sleepless nights. "I've brought the boy to my home," Samuel explained, his voice hollow. "Eliza thinks I've lost my mind. Perhaps I have, but I need someone with scientific credentials to examine him, to explain what cannot be explained. Dr. Blackwood nodded cautiously. And what exactly needs explaining, Mr. Rothwell? How a street urchin of approximately 10 years bears an identical tattoo to one my deceased son had, a tattoo that appears decades old on a child who wasn't born when it was made. The doctor's professional composure slipped momentarily. I don't understand. Samuel reached for a leather album on the side table and opened it to a marked page. This is my son, Thomas, before the accident. He pointed to a photograph of a smiling boy aboard a yacht. And this, he turned the page, is a photograph of his right arm, taken during a medical examination when he was 7. The image showed a close-up of a child's arm with a clear birthmark, or what appeared to be a birthmark, in the shape of numbers, 290645. My son was born with this mark. The doctors called it a coincidental arrangement of pigmentation, unusual but not medically significant. Now, this street boy has the exact same mark, except it's clearly a tattoo, faded and old, as if inked decades ago. Dr. Blackwood studied the photograph, his forehead creased in concentration. Birth defects can sometimes mimic patterns, Mr. Rothwell, but what you're suggesting— I'm not suggesting anything, Samuel interrupted. I'm asking you to examine the boy and tell me what science says about this impossibility. The following morning, Dr. Blackwood arrived at Rothwell Manor with his medical bag and a portable microscope. Thomas had been given a room in the East Wing, as far from the family quarters as possible. Eliza had insisted on this arrangement, clearly unnerved by Samuel's obsession with the child. The boy sat nervously on the edge of an ornate four-poster bed, dwarfed by the luxurious surroundings. His hair had been washed, his face cleaned, and he wore new clothes that hung slightly loose on his thin frame. Despite the transformation, the haunted look in his eyes remained unchanged. "Hello, Thomas," Dr. Blackwood greeted him gently. "I'm Dr. Blackwood. I'd like to examine your arm, if that's all right with you." Thomas nodded silently, extending his right arm. The doctor rolled up the sleeve carefully, revealing the faded blue numbers. Under the clear light of the bedroom lamp, the tattoo was even more perplexing. The ink had blurred and faded in exactly the way one would expect of a tattoo that had aged several decades, not something recently applied to a child. Dr. Blackwood took photographs, measurements, and skin samples. He examined the boy's teeth, checked his reflexes, and listened to his heart, all while Samuel watched from the doorway, his face a mask of controlled desperation. "Where did you get this tattoo, Thomas?" Dr. Blackwood asked casually as he worked. The boy shrugged. "Always had it. The sisters at St. Catherine's said I was born with it." "St. Catherine's?" "The orphanage. Been there since I was a baby, till I ran away last year." Samuel stepped forward. "Who brought you to St. Catherine's? Do you know anything about your parents?" Thomas shook his head. "Sister Agnes said I was left on the steps with nothing but a blanket and a note saying my name was Thomas, no family name." Dr. Blackwood completed his examination in silence, his professional demeanor unable to conceal his growing unease. Later, in Samuel's study, the doctor paced before the fireplace, occasionally stopping to sip the brandy Samuel had poured him. "It defies medical explanation," he finally admitted. "The tattoo is genuine, decades old by all appearances. The ink composition appears consistent with tattoos from the 1940s, a distinctive blue dye used primarily in that era. Yet the boy is clearly no more than 10 or 11 years old." Samuel stared into his own untouched glass. "What are you saying, doctor?" "I'm saying that either this boy has been subjected to some elaborate deception involving artificially aged tattoo ink, which would be unprecedented, or," he trailed off, reluctant to voice the alternative, Or what? Or we're dealing with something that science cannot currently explain. Samuel leaned forward, his knuckles white around the glass. Could he be? Could he somehow be my Thomas? Dr. Blackwood set his drink down carefully. Mr. Rothwell, your son died 12 years ago. This boy is younger than that. Whatever the explanation, it cannot be reincarnation or resurrection if that's what you're suggesting. Then what? Some kind of genetic memory passed down? A distant relation I never knew about? I don't know, the doctor admitted, but there's one way to find out more. With your permission, I'd like to run a DNA comparison between you and the boy. Samuel didn't hesitate. Do it. 3 days later, Dr. Blackwood returned to Rothwell Manor with a sealed envelope. His face was ashen, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. He requested a private meeting with Samuel, away from both Eliza and Thomas. In the conservatory, surrounded by exotic plants that Samuel's late wife had collected, the doctor handed over the envelope with shaking hands. I ran the test twice, he said hoarsely. I didn't believe it the first time. Samuel tore open the envelope and scanned the document inside. His face drained of all color. 99.8% match, he read aloud. He's my son. Biologically, yes, Dr. Blackwood confirmed, but it's impossible. Your son would be 22 now if he had lived. This boy is 10 or 11 at most. Samuel staggered to a nearby chair and collapsed into it. What does it mean? How can he be my son and yet not be? I don't know, the doctor confessed. But there's more. I visited St. Catherine's orphanage yesterday. Thomas was indeed left there as an infant, 12 years ago. The same year your son died. The note that accompanied him didn't just give his name. It contained a message. Samuel looked up, his eyes desperate for any explanation. What message? Dr. Blackwood reached into his pocket and pulled out a photocopy of a yellowed piece of paper. This is a copy of the original note. The handwriting. He paused, his voice breaking slightly. The handwriting matches samples of your late wife's that I obtained from your staff. Samuel's hands trembled as he took the paper. The handwritten message was brief but unmistakable. His name is Thomas. Samuel must find him when the time is right. He carries the mark of what was and what will be. The water took him once, but could not keep him. The industrialist's breathing became ragged. This is Elizabeth's handwriting, but she died with Thomas in the yacht accident. Her body was recovered 3 days later. Yes, Dr. Blackwood said quietly, and according to the records at St. Catherine's, the infant Thomas was left on their steps the very night your family's yacht sank. The silence that followed was broken only by Samuel's choked sobs and the distant ticking of a grandfather clock. Outside, dark clouds gathered, promising a storm that would match the tempest in the industrialist's mind. Eliza Harrington had observed the growing obsession with increasing alarm. What had begun as a strange coincidence had transformed her fiancé into a man she barely recognized. Samuel had installed the street urchin in their home, commissioned extensive medical tests, and now spent hours locked in his study poring over old family photographs and the boy's orphanage records. "This has gone far enough, Samuel," she confronted him one evening after dinner. "You've allowed grief to cloud your judgment. This child cannot be your son." Samuel looked up from his desk, his eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion. "The DNA doesn't lie, Eliza. He is my flesh and blood." "Then he's some relative you never knew about. A nephew, a cousin's child, anything but this resurrection fantasy you've constructed." "Then explain the tattoo," Samuel challenged. "Explain how he has the exact same mark with the exact same numbers in the exact same place as Thomas did." Eliza's composure cracked slightly. "I can't explain it, but neither can your doctor friend. Has he told you his latest theory?" That perhaps your wife somehow survived long enough to give birth to another child? It's absurd." Samuel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I've commissioned a team to locate and raise the yacht." Eliza stared at him, speechless for a moment. "The yacht that sank 12 years ago? Samuel, this is madness." "I need answers, Eliza. Whatever happened that night, whatever miracle or abomination brought this child into existence, I will discover the truth." Their argument was interrupted by a soft knock on the study door. Martha, the elderly housekeeper who had served the Rothwell family for over 40 years, entered with visible apprehension. "Begging your pardon, sir, but the boy is asking for you. He says he remembered something about the water." Samuel rushed past Eliza without a second glance, following Martha through the winding corridors of the manor to Thomas's room. The boy sat cross-legged on the bed, his face unusually pale in the lamplight. "I had a dream," Thomas said as soon as Samuel entered. "But it wasn't just a dream, it was like a memory." Samuel approached slowly, careful not to frighten the child. "What did you remember, Thomas?" "I was on a boat, a big white boat. There was a woman with red hair who called me her little captain." The boy's eyes grew distant. "Then there was a storm. The boat was rocking, and she'd put me in a special wooden box. She was crying and saying sorry that she had to send me back because I wasn't supposed to be there yet." Samuel's heart hammered in his chest. Elizabeth, his late wife, had indeed had striking red hair, and she had always called their son her little captain. These were details that had never been published in the press. "What else, Thomas? What happened after she put you in the box?" The boy's face contorted in concentration. "She wrote something on a paper, then put it with me in the box. Then she closed the lid, and I felt the box being lowered into the water. I was scared, but then I felt warm, like I was floating. The next thing I remember is being cold, and a woman in black clothes finding me on some steps." Samuel sank onto the edge of the bed, his legs no longer able to support him. The box, Thomas described, sounded like the antique sea chest that had been kept aboard the yacht, a family heirloom that had never been recovered. "Thomas," Samuel asked, his voice barely a whisper, "do you know what the numbers on your arm mean?" The boy looked down at his tattoo. "In my dream, the red-haired lady said they were the day I was born, but also the day I would return. The salvage operation took 6 weeks to complete. The wreckage of Samuel's yacht, the Elizabeth's Dream, lay at a depth of 70 meters off the coast of Cornwall. The recovery team worked tirelessly, battling adverse weather conditions and technical challenges to bring up the remains of the vessel that had claimed the lives of Elizabeth and Thomas Rothwell 12 years earlier. Dr. Blackwood stood beside Samuel on the private dock as the salvage barge approached, carrying what remained of the once magnificent yacht. The industrialist had aged visibly in the weeks since discovering Thomas. New lines etched his face, and silver threaded his once dark hair. "Whatever we find," Dr. Blackwood cautioned, "it may not provide the answers you're seeking." Samuel nodded grimly. "Any answer is better than this limbo." The wreckage was in surprisingly good condition, preserved by the cold waters and relatively protected position on the seabed. The hull had been breached, but much of the cabin structure remained intact. The salvage team had discovered something unexpected during their operation: a sealed antique sea chest, its brass fittings tarnished but still secure. It was wedged in what was left of the master cabin, the salvage foreman explained as the chest was carefully brought ashore. "Must have been trapped by falling debris during the sinking. That's probably why it didn't float away with the currents." The chest was transported to a warehouse Samuel had prepared specifically for the examination of the yacht's remains. Under the supervision of Dr. Blackwood and a marine archaeologist, the lock was carefully broken and the lid slowly raised. Inside, Preserved in the airless environment created by the chest's waterproof seal lay the skeletal remains of a child. Samuel recoiled in horror, a strangled cry escaping his lips. Dr. Blackwood immediately moved to his side, supporting him as his legs threatened to give way. "This cannot be," Samuel gasped. "Thomas's body was never recovered. The authorities concluded he was swept out to sea." The marine archaeologist, a stern-faced woman named Dr. Eleanor Pierce, leaned over the chest, her expression grave. "Based on the size of the remains, this appears to be a child of approximately 7 years, consistent with your son's age at the time of the accident." As the team carefully documented and removed the contents of the chest, they discovered more unsettling items. Beneath the remains lay a waterproof pouch containing a woman's diary, the leather cover stamped with the initials ER for Elizabeth Rothwell, and wrapped around the small skeleton's right arm, a copper bracelet engraved with the numbers 290645. Samuel could not bring himself to touch the diary. It sat on the examination table, its secret still locked within its pages, while Dr. Blackwood gently persuaded him to return to the manor. "You need rest, Samuel. We'll continue tomorrow when you've had time to process this shock." But rest would not come. Samuel paced the halls of his ancestral home like a ghost, eventually finding himself outside Thomas's room. The boy was asleep, his small chest rising and falling peacefully beneath the covers. In slumber, the resemblance to the original Thomas was even more pronounced. The same curve of the cheek, the same slight furrow between the brows. Martha appeared silently at his side, her aged face solemn in the dim hallway light. "You've seen him then? The boy from the water?" Samuel turned to her, startled by her choice of words. "What do you mean, the boy from the water?" The old housekeeper's eyes were distant, seeing beyond the present moment. "My grandmother was a wise woman from the old country. She used to tell stories of children born twice, souls that return when their first life is cut too short. They always come back through water, she said. Water is the barrier between what was and what will be." "Martha, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that some bonds cannot be broken, not even by death. Your lady knew this. She found a way to send him back to you." Before Samuel could question her further, Martha melted away into the shadows of the hallway, leaving him alone with the sleeping child, and a growing sense that the truth lay beyond the reach of science. The next morning, with Thomas still asleep, and Eliza notably absent from breakfast, Samuel finally gathered the courage to examine Elizabeth's diary. Dr. Blackwood joined him in the study, bringing with him the preliminary results of the bone analysis from the skeletal remains. "The DNA confirms it," the doctor said gravely. "The remains belong to your son, Thomas." Samuel nodded numbly, having already accepted this truth in his heart. He carefully opened the waterlogged diary, its pages remarkably preserved thanks to the waterproof pouch and airless environment of the sea chest. Elizabeth's elegant handwriting filled the pages, detailing the days leading up to that final, fateful voyage. The last entry, dated the day of the accident, sent chills down Samuel's spine. "The storm is worsening. Captain Reynolds advises we turn back. But I feel compelled to continue. The dreams have been getting stronger. Visions of Thomas drowning, then returning years later as if no time had passed. I've consulted the texts from my grandmother's library, the ones Samuel always dismissed as superstitious nonsense. There is a ritual, an ancient one, that might give Thomas another chance if the worst should happen. I've prepared everything. The chest, the sigils, the binding numbers. The same numbers that appeared as a birthmark on his arm, a sign I should have heeded years ago. If we do not survive this storm, I pray it works. I pray he finds his way back to his father when the time is right. Forgive me, Samuel, for what I must do." Samuel's hands trembled as he turned the page, but the rest of the diary was blank. "What does she mean, binding numbers?" And what ritual? Elizabeth was a rational woman, a scientist by training. Dr. Blackwood hesitated. When we examined your wife's personal effects after her body was recovered, we found several unusual items in her cabin aboard the rescue vessel. Books on ancient mysticism, symbols drawn in what appeared to be her own blood. At the time, we attributed it to the trauma of the shipwreck and the loss of her son.
We thought perhaps she had suffered a psychological break before her death. "You never told me this," Samuel said, his voice hollow. "Your grief was overwhelming. What good would it have done to tell you your wife might have experienced a mental collapse in her final hours?" Samuel closed the diary gently. "She didn't collapse, James. She was trying to save our son. And somehow, impossibly, she succeeded." The doctor's scientific mind rebelled against this conclusion. "Samuel, you cannot seriously believe that Elizabeth performed some sort of resurrection ritual? That the boy upstairs is your son reborn? Then explain the DNA match. Explain the tattoo that perfectly mirrors his original birthmark. Explain his memories of events no one but Elizabeth and Thomas could have known." Dr. Blackwood had no answer. That night, as a violent thunderstorm battered Rothwell Manor, Samuel sat beside Thomas's bed, watching the boy sleep.
The child stirred restlessly, his dreams apparently troubled by the raging weather. "Father," Thomas murmured, his eyes still closed, "is the storm going to sink us again?" Samuel took the boy's hand gently. "No, Thomas, we're safe on land. The storm can't reach us here." The child's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and distant. "Mother said I had to go back to the beginning, that I had to start over to make things right. She said you would understand when you saw the numbers." "What do the numbers mean, Thomas?" "Why, 29, 06, 45. The day I was born the first time," Thomas whispered, "and the day the war ended." Samuel froze. Elizabeth had indeed given birth to Thomas on June 29, 1945, just weeks after the end of World War II in Europe. It was a detail they had always considered a happy coincidence, that their son had been born into a world newly at peace.
"Mother said the numbers are a door," Thomas continued, his voice taking on a strange, adult quality that sent shivers down Samuel's spine. "A door that can be opened when someone loves enough to pay the price." "What price, Thomas? What did your mother pay?" The boy's eyes drifted closed again, his face relaxing back into childish innocence. "Her soul," he murmured as he slipped back into sleep. "She gave her soul so I could come home to you." The storm reached its peak around midnight. Samuel, unable to sleep, had retired to his study with the diary and a bottle of whiskey. The power had gone out an hour earlier, leaving the manor in darkness save for the occasional flash of lightning and the warm glow of the fireplace. A sudden crash from upstairs sent Samuel running through the darkened corridors, guided only by the storm's intermittent illumination. He reached Thomas's room to find the window shattered, rain and wind whipping the curtains into a frenzy. The bed was empty. "Thomas!" Samuel shouted, panic rising in his throat. "Thomas, where are you?" A bolt of lightning revealed a small figure standing by the broken window, glass shards glittering at his feet. Thomas turned slowly, his face eerily calm amid the chaos of the storm. "She's calling me back, Father," the boy said, his voice barely audible above the howling wind. "Mother says the cycle isn't complete." Samuel approached carefully, mindful of the broken glass. "Thomas, come away from the window. It's dangerous." "The numbers are a door," Thomas repeated, raising his arm to show the tattoo. In the next lightning flash, Samuel gasped as he saw the faded blue numbers glowing with an internal light,
pulsing in rhythm with the storm. And doors can be closed as well as opened. Before Samuel could reach him, Thomas turned and climbed onto the window ledge. "I have to go to the water, Father, but I'll come back again."
Mother promised. Samuel lunged forward with a cry of desperation, but his fingers closed on empty air as Thomas leapt from the third-story window. The industrialist's howl of anguish mingled with the storm's fury as he rushed to the shattered opening, peering down into the darkness below. There was no body on the ground, no sign that a child had fallen at all, just rain-soaked grass and the distant sound of waves crashing against the cliffs beyond the manor grounds. Dawn broke clear and bright, the storm having passed in the night, leaving behind a washed clean world of glistening surfaces and renewed clarity. Samuel stood on the cliff edge, staring out at the calm sea that had twice now claimed his son. Dr. Blackwood and a search team combed the grounds and shoreline below, but there was no trace of Thomas. No body, no footprints, nothing to suggest the boy had ever existed. Eliza found Samuel there, his face aged by grief and the impossible knowledge he now carried. She approached cautiously, her own face tear-stained and remorseful. "I didn't believe you," she said softly. "I thought you had lost your mind, that grief had consumed you. But Martha showed me the diary, and I saw him leap from the window. I saw him vanish before he hit the ground." Samuel didn't look at her, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the blue of the sea met the blue of the sky. "He said he'll return. That Elizabeth promised. Do you believe that?" "I don't know what to believe anymore, but I'll wait. If it takes another 12 years, or 50, or 100, I'll wait for him to find his way back." As they stood in silence, a small fishing boat appeared around the headland, making its way toward the manor's private dock. Samuel watched it with mild curiosity, wondering what business a fishing vessel would have at his property. The boat drew closer, and he could make out two figures aboard, a weathered fisherman at the helm, and beside him, a small, dark-haired child. "Samuel," Eliza gasped, clutching his arm. "Look at the boy's arm." Samuel squinted against the morning sun, focusing on the child who now stood at the boat's prow, waving enthusiastically toward the cliff. Around the boy's right wrist gleamed a copper bracelet, identical to the one found with the skeletal remains in the sea chest. The industrialist's legs gave way beneath him, and he sank to his knees on the cliff edge, tears streaming down his face. "Thomas," he whispered, "my son." Dr. Blackwood, returning from his fruitless search along the shoreline, reached Samuel's side just as the fishing boat docked below. "It's impossible," the doctor murmured. "I examined that child myself last night. I confirmed his death." "Perhaps," Samuel replied, rising to his feet with renewed strength, "some bonds truly cannot be broken, not even by death." As Samuel began the descent to the dock, Dr. Blackwood noticed something that stopped his scientific mind cold. The tattoo on the approaching child's arm was visible even from this distance, but the numbers had changed. No longer 290645, the faded blue digits now read 290657, the 29th of June, 1957, today's date. The cycle had reset itself once more, opening a door through time that science could not explain, but a father's love could somehow unlock. And on the child's other arm, previously unmarked, a new tattoo was forming, numbers slowly bleeding through the skin from within. 290669, 12 years into the future, the next doorway home. Could you ever love someone enough to break the laws of nature for them? What price would you be willing to pay to bring back someone you've lost? Comment below and share your thoughts on this mysterious case. If this story sent chills down your spine, make sure to hit subscribe
and the notification bell to join us on our next journey into the unexplainable darkness of history's most disturbing mysteries.